There's an old saying in finance that bulls make money, bears make money, but pigs get slaughtered. And right now, millions of investors are walking straight into the slaughterhouse with their wallets wide open and their eyes completely shut. You see, the market has a funny way of recycling its greatest hits. The same psychological traps that have been emptying bank accounts for decades are back in full force, dressed up in modern clothing and served with a side of social media hype. The scary part isn't that these traps exist. It's that every single generation of investors thinks they're immune to them. Here's what's happening right now. Across trading platforms, investment forums, and financial social media, there's a dangerous narrative taking hold. It's the story that risk has been eliminated, that certain strategies are foolproof, and that the old rules of investing simply don't apply anymore. Sound familiar? It should, because this exact same story has been told before every major market correction in history. The players change, the technology evolves, but human nature remains stubbornly consistent. What makes this particularly dangerous is how sophisticated these modern traps have become. We're not talking about obvious pump and dump schemes or get-rich-quick scams that even your grandmother would spot from a mile away. No, these are psychological bear traps disguised as cutting-edge investment wisdom. They're backed by compelling data, promoted by influencers with millions of followers, and wrapped in the kind of financial jargon that makes people feel smart for participating. The trap I'm talking about has 3 distinct phases, and understanding these phases could be the difference between building wealth and watching your portfolio evaporate. Phase 1 always starts with a kernel of truth. There's always some genuine innovation, some real technological breakthrough, or some legitimate market shift that creates actual value and real returns for early participants. This initial success isn't fake. The profits are real, the growth is measurable, and the excitement is justified. But here's where things get interesting. Phase 2 begins when that initial success starts attracting attention. Word spreads through social media, financial news networks pick up the story, and suddenly everyone wants in on the action. The narrative shifts from cautious optimism to inevitable certainty. Risk gets reframed as opportunity, and anyone questioning the sustainability gets labeled as outdated or simply not understanding the new paradigm. During this phase, something crucial happens to human psychology. The fear of missing out becomes stronger than the fear of losing money. Rational analysis gets replaced by emotional decision-making. People start treating speculation like investment and confusing temporary price appreciation with permanent value creation. The most dangerous part is how reasonable it all sounds when you're in the middle of it. Phase 3 is where the trap springs shut. By this point, the original fundamentals that justified the initial success have been completely overwhelmed by pure speculation. Prices have disconnected from any reasonable measure of value, but nobody wants to admit it because everyone is making money on paper. The narrative becomes self-reinforcing. Higher prices validate the strategy, which attracts more participants, which drives prices even higher. What makes this cycle so devastating isn't just the financial losses when it inevitably collapses. It's the psychological damage that follows. Investors who get caught in these traps often spend years trying to break even, making increasingly desperate bets to recover their losses. They become victims of what psychologists call loss aversion, where the pain of losing money becomes so intense that it clouds all future decision-making. The most insidious part of this entire process is how it disguises itself as education and empowerment. Participants genuinely believe they're being smart, sophisticated investors who have discovered something that traditional finance doesn't understand. They develop an almost religious conviction about their chosen strategy, immune to criticism and deaf to warning signs. Right now, as I'm recording this, all 3 phases of this trap are playing out simultaneously across different corners of the market. Some investors are just entering phase 1, experiencing those first intoxicating taste of easy profits. Others are deep in phase 2, convinced they've cracked the code to guaranteed wealth. And unfortunately, some are about to discover what phase 3 really means. The question isn't whether this cycle will complete itself. History tells us it always does. The question is whether you'll recognize the warning signs before it's too late. The warning signs are everywhere if you know where to look. But here's the problem. When you're caught in the middle of a market euphoria, those warning signs don't look like warnings at all. They look like validation. Every piece of contradictory evidence gets twisted into proof that you're on the right track. Every skeptical voice gets dismissed as someone who just doesn't get it. Let me paint you a picture of what these warning signs actually look like in real time. First, you'll notice that complexity gets marketed as sophistication. Simple investment principles that have worked for decades suddenly get labeled as outdated dinosaur thinking. Instead, you'll hear about revolutionary new approaches that require specialized knowledge, insider access, or proprietary algorithms. The message is clear. If you're not using these advanced strategies, you're leaving money on the table. Second, risk gets rebranded as conservatism. Traditional concepts like diversification, position sizing, and risk management get painted as the tools of scared investors who lack the vision to see the bigger picture. You'll hear phrases like calculated risk or intelligent speculation thrown around like they're fundamentally different from gambling. The narrative becomes that real wealth is built by those brave enough to concentrate their bets and ignore conventional wisdom. Third, and this one is crucial, success stories become the primary form of evidence. You'll be bombarded with testimonials from people who made extraordinary returns using these strategies. What you won't hear about are the selection bias, the survivorship bias, or the thousands of people who tried the exact same approach and lost everything. The winners become proof that the system works, while the losers simply disappear from the narrative entirely. Fourth, criticism gets treated as jealousy or ignorance. Any expert who raises concerns about sustainability, valuation, or risk gets immediately discredited. They're portrayed as bitter traditionalists who miss the boat, establishment figures protecting their own interests, or simply people who lack the intelligence to understand the new paradigm. This creates an echo chamber where dissenting voices are systematically eliminated. But perhaps the most dangerous warning sign of all is when these strategies stop being presented as investments and start being presented as movements. You'll hear language about being part of something bigger, joining a community of forward-thinking individuals, or participating in a financial revolution. The strategy becomes tied to your identity, making it psychologically impossible to change course even when the evidence suggests you should. The bottom line is this: market traps aren't going anywhere because human nature isn't evolving. The same greed, fear, and herd mentality that drove every bubble in history are alive and well today, just wearing different clothes. You can either learn from the past or become another cautionary tale for future investors to study.